Hey everyone, it's Ben. Hope everyone's doing well. This video is going to be my last horror series overview. I've done Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Psycho, and growing up the other horror series that was my favorite and one that I always rushed out the theater to see was Nightmare on Elm Street. I was a huge Friday the 13th fan when Nightmare on Elm Street started to become the phenomenon that it grew to be. It took me a while to convert over to Nightmares. I was, and still am, the biggest Jason fan, but Freddy was hard to resist, especially when I was a young kid, and he was such a fun character to be scared of because he had so much personality, and Robert Englund, of course, is a genius, and he really is Freddy, and he really brought the character to life. And I really don't think, even though, like I've said in the past when I did my review of the remake, as good as Jackie Earle Haley is as an actor, I don't really think anybody's ever going to be able to replace Robert Englund for me as Freddy. And I'm sure there will be new incarnations of Freddy along the way, whether it's a sequel to the remake, which if that ever happens, or if, you know, in 10 years from now they decide to try again and have another actor come in to play Freddy. It's going to be really tough for anybody else but Robert Englund to be known as Freddy for me. He is Freddy Krueger. He's an amazing actor, and I can't see him being replaced. So what I will do here is go through the Nightmare on Elm Street films and give you my take on them. I have the first one on Blu-ray. There's actually some really cool features on this one. And I also bought, I have the whole Nightmare set, and this came out in the late 90s. That was when DVDs were really starting to take off, and they had released the whole box set of the Nightmare on Elm Street series. So the easiest way for me to do this is to just go through each one in the box set. Now I also have the one that they put out just before the remake was released, and this one, the only difference between this set and this one, well actually this set is a much cooler looking set. This set, the only difference is that Freddy versus Jason is also included. But what I'll start with is of course the original. I'll pull it out here. So, 1984, original Nightmare on Elm Street, starring Heather Langenkamp as Nancy, Johnny Depp as Glenn, Nick Corey as Rod, Amanda Wyss as Tina, John Saxon as Lieutenant Thompson, and then of course Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, or Fred Krueger. There's nothing bad you can say about the original Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, what an interesting concept. You know, up until this point, you had killers in movies, you know, like Michael Myers and Jason in that vein, but this killer was even more of a threat, that he could get you when you were asleep, when you're at your most vulnerable. And, you know, Wes Craven wrote a really good script, did a great job directing it. Very scary film still to this day, and I think that you know, it's the nature of Freddy's jokes and the way that he sort of messes with your mind that you start to realize just how sadistic and sinister the character is, and it's unfortunate that that didn't stay with the character as the films went on. But yeah, Freddy's not fun in this movie. He's not, I mean, he does have a couple of one-liners, but for the most part, he's just a scary guy. And the cast is great. Heather Langenkamp, big crush on her growing up, and she's just amazing as Nancy. And Glenn, played by the amazing Johnny Depp, big fan of him, always have been. You know, and then you just have such a great cast to back them up. You cared about every one of these characters. I mean, when Rob's accused of killing Tina, you feel bad for Rob. You don't want anything to happen to him. When Tina dies, you think Tina's going to be the heroine, and she's not. And because that's the way it sort of goes at the beginning. Almost does a Psycho switch on you there, where, you know, you think you're following one character and it ends up you're not. You're following her best friend. And then, of course, you know, I mean, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger is just, I mean, I still get chills when I see the scene in the alleyway where his arms are stretching out and he appears to Tina. It's just such a great movie and such a scary movie. Yeah, so there's really, I mean, you can't replace this film, and I think it was stupid of New Line to think they could with the remake. As much as the remake tried to stray away from the original, I mean, it was almost released and marketed as a direct remake to the original, and you can't do that. That's where the Friday the 13th reboot was smart. They didn't try to redo the original. You can't. It's impossible. So, big fan of this one. Always will be. It's my favorite out of the series, and let's move on to Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Okay, so Nightmare on Elm Street 2 Freddy's Revenge came out a year after the original. Completely different film, which is good. I mean, you don't want a carbon copy of the original, but unfortunately Wes Craven didn't come back to write or direct. Thankfully, Robert Englund did come back to play Freddy Krueger. Originally, they did recast it, Robert Shea thinking that it wasn't, you know, necessary to bring Robert Englund back, and what an idiot. Thank God he got his senses there. In this one, you have the story of Jesse, who moves into Nancy Thompson's old house, starts having nightmares about Freddy. The opening of this film, I think, is great, on the bus, where the bus is racing into the desert, and Jesse and these two girls are trapped on the bus as Freddy, the bus driver turns into Freddy and speeds into the desert. I mean, it's such a creepy opening. But Mark Patton as Jesse, a lot of people, you know, the fact that Mark Patton is gay, and you know, that Mark was almost, you know, the first male scream queen. But he's really good in this film. I mean, for a 1980s movie, I mean, there was a lot of heavy topics that were tackled here, and I think he did a very good job in the role. Then you got Kim Myers in the role of Lisa, and look, she looks just like Meryl Streep, which I think is the reason they hired her, but she's gorgeous, and another big crush on her growing up. And then Robert Russler is great. He is just fun. Had some great comic relief in this film. Now, this movie deals with a possession storyline more so than the dreams. You know, Jesse is eventually possessed by Freddy, and Freddy comes into the real world, which threw off a lot of fans because, I mean, Freddy was at his scariest in the dreams. And one thing that Wes Craven even said in the Nightmare on Elm Street documentary is that once you take him out of that reality, he doesn't have the control or the presence that he has, because he controls everything in the dream. In reality, why would people be scared of him? You know, and so I understand. It's like at the, you know, the pool party scene where he's attacking people, and I think it's a cool scene, but I mean, I understand where Wes is coming from, but I still like Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. I think it's kind of the black sheep of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and I actually think it's stronger than some of the later films in the series. Jack Sholder did a good job directing it. There is a lot of homoerotic undertones to it, but anyway, I really do like Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and I do think it's one of the strongest in the Elm Street series. I think a lot of people crap on it for no reason, but I am a fan of it. So, another good film. Now we're on to Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. Now, Dream Warriors ties with number 1 for me as my favorite. Not only did they do everything right by getting Wes Craven to write an original treatment for the film and the original story, but they got a great director in Chuck Russell, who would go on to direct The Mask, and they also got Frank Darabont from Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile and now Walking Dead to do the screenplay as well, and you know, it's just a great movie. You got Nancy Thompson coming back, you got the surviving Elm Street kids taking on Freddy in the dream world, using their powers that they've, you know, created to battle him, and it's just a great film. Just some good action and good characters. Again, it was like you cared about these characters quite a bit, and I think that's the strength of the first 3 Elm Street movies. You just really like the characters. And there's some really interesting visuals in this. At the marionette scene where Freddy turns into the little puppet, and then he gets Phil in his bed and turns him into a puppet by pulling the veins out of his hands and legs. And it's just like, ugh. I mean, that scene's still cringe-inducing. How they did that is just off the charts cool. And then you got the scene with the TV, "Welcome to Primetime, bitch." I mean, that's going to be Freddy's, I think, most famous
So yeah,
saying
great
forever.
film.
Ties with #1 for me as my favorite. From here we go to part 4, which was the most successful Nightmare on Elm Street film, and I think that has to do with how good part 3 was, and that's Nightmare on Elm Street 4: The Dream Master, which came out in 1988. And I saw this opening day when I was 14, and it was one of the only ones of my friends that could get into the theater because I was tall enough. They bought that I was 17 somehow. But back then it wasn't as strict as it is now for kids to get into these movies. Now, I like Dream Master. I've had a few problems with it, and it's not so much the acting or the directing. It's just so much the story. I know they kind of rushed the movie to get it out there for the summer. I didn't like the fact that the survivors of Part 3 were killed off so quickly in this film. I mean, we had developed a relationship with them. I also didn't like that Tuesday Night replaced Patricia Arquette as Kirsten. Kirsten was sort of, carrying over from Part 3 and kind of taking Nancy's place. And I didn't like the fact that another actress who I thought wasn't really good came in to play her. But that all being said and done, I didn't like that Kincaid and Joey were killed off so quickly in this film. And then I just, the other characters were cool. I mean, I liked Alice. She was cool in the fact that she was absorbing all of her friend's powers to take on Freddy at the end. I also liked her brother. I thought he was a great character in it. But in the end, I just wasn't as big of a fan of the story. The visuals in this film are great. The pizza scene where all the faces are in the pizza and Freddy gets Rick, Alice's brother, with his blades, and I mean, that was a cool scene. And then the cockroach scene, of course, is most famous. And then at the end, when the chests of souls all breaks out of Freddy, that's just a really cool scene. And Robert Englund was great in this film. I think he had wanted this film to be the last Freddy film he did, but of course there were a few more sequels after this. And Reddy Harlan does a great job directing this film, and he would go on to do films like Die Hard 2 and Cliffhanger, as well as Deep Blue Sea, which is one of my favorite movies he's done. But yeah, just not as good as the other three. This is probably, in the lower half of films that I like it a lot, but it's just not as good as the first 3 in the series, and I think it had to do with not enough character development, killing off the survivor characters way too quickly, and just a lack of focus in the story. But still a good film, and still a film I watch on occasion and enjoy. Now, we're on to Part 5, The Dream Child. Now, this was directed by Stephen Hopkins, who would do films like Judgment Night. He did Hellraiser 3. He's very visually interesting director to pick up the Freddy story. But again, I felt the same problems with this one that I felt with Part 4. As much as I liked it, I just didn't feel the character development was well done. The script was kind of hit or miss, just not as focused of a film as the first 3 in the series, I felt. And I mean, Robert Englund did a great job as Freddy, and I was glad to see Lisa Wilcox come back as Alice. But just didn't give me it just wasn't a good story. As it was interesting that Freddy was going to try to get back at Alice by possessing her unborn baby's dreams, coming at her and to get her friends and her through the baby's dreams, which was an interesting story, but just it was okay. I mean, this is probably one of my least favorite in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and you could tell that the film series they were starting to run out of ideas for what Freddy could do next. So yeah, not a huge fan of this one. Some good scenes in it though. I love the comic book scene where Mark takes on Freddy as a comic book hero, and where Freddy becomes Super Freddy. That was cool. And then you also have the motorcycle scene where Dan turns into it's almost like the bike from hell, and that scene was really cool. But yeah, just not a great film overall. It was okay, and it's one I still watch. Like I said, I don't really hate any of these films. If I'm going to be critical here, this is just one I wasn't as crazy about as the others. From here we go on to Freddy's Dead.